Hello everyone and welcome to the, let's call it the extended TERA modding Photoshop guide. In this guide I'm going to show you my methods for changing around the norm files as well as the spec files to achieve different effects. The effects you've seen me use on the forums if you're a forum goer on TERA Today, or if you aren't, maybe learn a little something about the things you can achieve by changing all three of these files together. Now before we continue, I'm assuming you've checked out the original guide on TERA Today forums by Seelroy. In this guide, you'll find all the basics to diff editing that you could pretty much ever need to get started. It includes a word description guide of what all the files do and what they are, a UT helper to help you get these files out of the GPKs and put them back in, as well as an NVIDIA plugin and a guide in order to get these files changed around and get them working in the game. This is a great guide to start off. It's a great guide to learn all of the basics of exactly how to do what I'm going to show you here. And I expect that you've watched this and learned from this before you continue with what I'm going to show you here, because this will definitely get your feet wet, and the guide I'm going to show you will show you a little bit further of what you can do. For the first part of this guide, we're going to have to change our diff file to whatever we want it to look like. Now, of course, this is my PSD file with the originals and the retextures that I have. But in order to get those effects, I'm going to show you how I do that. So if I head over to my Paths tab here and create a new layer, or two new layers, I'll click on one of these layers and rename it. Let's just call it lines. Now in this lines, I'll press P to get the pen tool, and this will allow me to click and drag, and click again to create a design, whatever I would need on here. Let's just call it like that. Let's say that's what I wanted. I can then click on my other path tool and then click back, and that'll be a separate path now if I want to create a new path. I can create a bunch of different paths here, switch path group, switch back, and create another path group here if I wanted maybe another line here. Now, of course, there's probably another way to exit out of these paths and create a new path. Unfortunately, I don't know what that is, so I just use this way to get out of this. So now we have our paths set, and we want to turn them into some glowing lines. So how do we turn them into glowing lines? Well, that's going to be covered a little bit later, because there's a few steps we have to do before we can even get to that stage. The first step, of course, is taking the brush tool and coming back to your layers panel. You want to create a new layer. You can just call this one lines as well, and then come back into here. Now what this will allow you to do is create a layer on top of your original file that's going to have, that you can choose to make these brushes, or that you can choose to make these lines rather. So I'm going to choose a size at random, or whatever I would want to use. I think I'm actually going to go with 10 for this one. That seems pretty good. Go back to the paths, make sure all this is selected, and then just choose whatever color you want. I'll go ahead and choose red this time around and hit enter. And that'll create these lines on here. And you can hide them by clicking on your other path group. So now what we have here is we have some lines on top of here. Hardly glowing, but they'll show up in game as just colored lines on this figure. So then, how do we get them to be raised up? Well, the raised bumps and ridges are what you find in the norm file. So in order to do that, we'll have to head back to the layers panel. We're going to grab our lines file and our original base by control clicking, and we're going to drag those two both into this norm file. And it'll be something like this. The only reason I dragged the original is so I can line these up perfectly. and you'll see how it sort of snaps into place with the edges of this file. And that's what we want to achieve. I want this to be in the exact same place, because if it's off by even a little bit, the effect is going to look terrible in game. So now you can see, if I compare these two, that this file here and this file here, if I turn this off, are lined up in the exact same place. The next thing you'll want to do is grab a hold of this lines layer, go to Effects, give it Bevel and Emboss, and we're looking to create something similar to what we're seeing here. Now this is where the lighting sort of comes into play. You have to sort of look at this edge is lit up on the top side, this edge is lit up on the top side, this edge of this ridge is lit up on the top side. So if we zoom in as an example, this lit up ridge here and this lit up ridge here. So these are both going to be sitting in the same orientation, and they're both going to be telling the game engine that something is popping out here, that something is there to capture light. So what we have to do with this is do the exact same thing. We have to change this so it's lit up towards the same side, and we can change our bevels here to deeper. We want it very crisp. We want those edges very solid. And you'll get something like this. Now you don't have to necessarily worry about the coloring, as any color in here will work. It just reads these brighter and darker values when you put something in here. If we were to look at the one I have originally in the download version, it looks something like this. Now what I did here is I used Control-I to change the color of this layer. So originally I had this blue, and I pressed Control-I to change it to yellow. This is something you'll have to experiment with whatever colors you use. If I'm using this red up here, it may turn out that this sinks all of these in because of the color this is, or maybe the orientation you have. And if that ends up happening, you come back in here and do Control-I. And this should reverse it and make it so it'll now pop outward rather than inward based on the color choices that are in here. There are a few times where the bevel and emboss will have to change direction, and you'll have to go opposite to what the file says, and that'll make it pop out. This is more of an experimentation stage. I don't know a direct formula that will always work, but when I look at this, I tend to try and see where these lit up ridges are in comparison to where my lit up and darkened ridges are. So now that we have our diff file set and our norm file set with exactly the types of things we want in there, our glowing lines of course, we're going to need to look at the spec file. Now the spec file in-game is how light reflects off of things. For instance, you may have noticed on your character when you're standing in a brightly lit area that there's a glowing white circle on them from the light. Or you look at them from the side, and from the side the costume appears to be a different color. Maybe it appears to be a blue, even though the costume's actually red. That's all the work of the spec file and how the in-game light is reacting to this costume. So for instance, this file is telling, when you see this original file here, you're going to see this blue and black. But what the spec file is going to show you is a little bit of brown here to suggest that the clothing is thinner. And that's the sort of effect you'll achieve with this spec file. Going along those same lines of reflected light, if we were to examine our glowing lines here, we want these to glow red. So we need to use that knowledge of knowing how light reflects in the game in order to make these red. So once again, I'm going to grab my lines file from here and this background layer from the norm file and drag it into the spec file. The first thing you'll notice is these are quite a bit bigger, and we're going to definitely need to make them smaller. So I'll press Control-T to open up my transform controls, and I'm going to hold Alt and Shift so I make sure that the scaling stays exactly the same. and I'm going to scale these down together and try and fit it directly to this frame here. Now I won't hold Alt this time, I'll just hold Shift in order to pull it to this exact size. Try and move it into place. You want this to be as exact as possible. So see how all my edges are very clean. There's no type of outline or anything like that. And then hit Enter. You can then just delete this norm layer here, and you'll have these in the exact same place as these other two. So now we have a basic color. So when in-game, there will be red lines covering this character. These lines will also pop out in this exact place where these red pieces are. And on top of that, they'll now have a slight red glow to them. Now in the spec file, the bevel and emboss doesn't really matter, and we can actually effectively turn this off and leave that off, because the bevel and emboss is only really necessary for having something to stand out as you do in the norm file. Now this is going to be a very weak glow, because as the spec file works with this particular costume, the lighting is not very intense. It's not intense at all. In fact, you'll probably barely see a difference with this red right here. So what I usually do is I'll take this file, or this layer, I'll duplicate this layer, aligns copy. Let's get rid of these layered effects so we don't get confused here. So now we have this lines copy. I'll take that, filter, and effect. Where are you? Oh no, we want filter, blur, there we go. Gaussian blur. I've been working too much in Illustrator lately. So you'll see here that this now looks like it's almost glowing red. What I usually do is I'll set this to 2.5 and hit OK. I'll then take this again, duplicate that, and on this second layer, I'll apply this filter, blur, or this, clicked on the wrong thing, this filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then I'll make this second layer 5. Now what this effect is going to achieve is when the light reflects off of this area of the costume, it's going to look like that this light is glowing along the edges, that it's reflecting itself onto the edge of this costume. So for instance, normally you would see this brown reflecting on here. But what I'm giving the effect is here is that this is receiving the light and reflecting it onto the surface. That's what this red glow does. Without the red glow, it would essentially just appear to be a brighter red when it's in light. But with this glow, it appears that it's reflecting back onto the surface. Now, as stated earlier, this is not going to be very bright. In fact, this will probably be a very dull red based on how this spec file works. And in order to get a brighter red, you can Control L on your first layer down here, adjust these to make this closer to white, make it as bright as possible. This white right here would probably be incredibly bright, and you would actually see this reflecting as a sort of whitish red, maybe a pink in the light. And this is the effect you kind of want to achieve. You want this to be this really shiny, bright region that reflects all of the light in the environment when it hits it. And it'll also have this slight red glow. If we were to look at my originals for an example, you would see that these are my original blue lines, a very bright shade of blue. And if we add on these copies, they'll slowly get brighter and brighter until they're this very vibrant neon-like look. And this exact look right here is how you will achieve that very bright reflection. Also, if you noticed on the costume, there's that blue glow on these two areas in the version 2, and that is achieved by just adding these two blue regions here, and that'll give it a blue glow. So as far as this guide goes, that's how I achieve those standing out effects and those glowing line effects of this particular costume. Now, where you take this information with the norm file and the spec file is beyond me. Whatever you can make to your heart's desire that you can use this information for. Just always remember to keep the light source in mind. For this, keep the light source in mind. It's coming this way. And for the spec file, always keep in mind you want these to line up perfectly, and you also want to give if you want something to look like it's reflecting back onto the surface, you'll always want to make sure that you give it that sort of reflecting quality. If you want something to reflect, make sure you give it this outer glow. And that's it for this guide, and that's all I'm going to be covering here. In the next video, I'll be covering how I edit shapes. So for instance, the arcane stole, how I got that to look with its custom shape using alpha channels. So stay tuned for that video, and thanks for watching.